Magneto and Apocalypse usually being enemies to one another makes no damn sense. Or does it? On the surface level, these guys essentially want the exact same thing: mutant domination. Magneto more so wants to prevent mutants being wiped out, and he lost faith in humans and humanity not only during World War II, but also during Operation Paperclip. He believes that in society, a majority will always try to destroy a minority, so he opposes that with sheer power. Apocalypse is a little different. While he does believe in mutant domination, it's more so the powerful and quote useful mutants that he actually cares about. Apocalypse, through his circumstances, believes in survival of the fittest. He seeks to ensure that the strong survive and populate so as to create a society in which the strongest mutants would wage eternal war, thus ensuring his own supremacy over the world since he believes himself to be the strongest. Hawkeye and the Winter Soldier seem like two dudes who you might think should be buds, given they're both dealing with some shady past trauma. While they have worked together because they've had to, they aren't the most fond of each other. For starters, these two have both had history with Black Widow. They've also both been in the running to take up the shield of Captain America. During the story Fallen Sun, Hawkeye took up the mantle for a brief period of time, but gave it up because he felt that becoming Cap wouldn't be respecting Steve's memory or wishes. When the shield went to Bucky, he routinely tested the guy. They're also just completely different personality-wise. Following the passing of Black Widow, these two sort of team up and dive into her past, and they do not trust each other one little bit. Now, this next rivalry is actually pretty well documented, as it was the entire drive between Civil War II. Thanks to a little clairvoyant Inhuman, Iron Man and Captain Marvel went head to head in a conflict that was supposed to split the superheroes down the middle. Now, these two are usually actually pretty decent friends and share a few things in common, but because Carol saw this Inhuman as a way to basically replicate Minority Report and stop crimes before they happen, and because Iron Man thought that this was a little too close to authoritarianism, boom, conflict. A conflict that saw the passing of War Machine, who was later resurrected, and caused the passing of the Incredible Hulk, who was also later resurrected, and ended with Captain Marvel beating Tony into a coma, which actually ended his life, but then he was, say it with me now, resurrected. Yes, good job. Now, while most of the Spider-Man family in Marvel Comics are ultimately pretty positive individuals, two of the more brooding and dark members would have to be Kane Parker and Flash Thompson. Now, you might think their similarities should give them even grounds for friendship, but during one story, Minimum Carnage, they very nearly took each other's lives. Despite both being on the trail of Carnage, who had escaped from prison, these two still bicker the whole time. Scarlet Spider even immediately denies helping Agent Venom when he learns that Carnage went into the microverse. Scarlet Spider is a very unwilling hero, having been a villain for so long. Agent Venom is an Avenger and is trying to actually complete a mission. Kane will take a life when it's necessary. Flash will try his best to not let that happen. Hell, the whole event ended with Kane lobotomizing Cletus Cassidy and then swinging off into the distance, leaving Flash to clean up the pieces. Now, this next rivalry is rather strange, because while young Nathaniel Richards admired the heck out of Dr. Doom and was even possibly related to him, when Nathaniel grew up and became Kang the Conqueror, that admiration seems to have turned into hate. In Kang the Conqueror #1, a young Nathaniel Richards breaks into and liberates the old library of Dr. Doom, thinking that now, having all of Doom's knowledge, he will become so much more powerful. But upon discovering the place, he is attacked by an old Doom bot, which is when his future self, Kang the Conqueror, shows up, destroys the bot, sends it back to Doom in the 20th century to let him know who destroyed it, and then tells his younger self that basically Doom ain't nothing and that he can give his younger self all that he seeks. In 2021's Timeless, there was a man who specialized in supervillain history, and he decided to write a book about Dr. Doom since, to him, no villain equaled Doom. Learning this, Kang stole this man to persuade him into considering him to be the better supervillain. Now, there have been a lot of instances where these two egomaniacs constantly try to one-up each other as the best villain. It's a battle of egos, pure and simple. For a short while, Norman Osborn's character was thought to be deceased, but the pressure was on to have a character like the Green Goblin who was so fun and insane and wild. So, Roger Stern decided that instead of just bringing Norman back or using Harry Osborn, he would create a new villain that was just very similar. Shady business mogul Roderick Kingsley stumbled onto one of Norman Osborn's old hideouts filled with Green Goblin equipment, and so he took it, improved upon it, changed its color, and became the Hobgoblin. This rivalry was even prevalent with other versions of the characters. When Harry Osborn was the Green Goblin, he got into a fight with Hobgoblin, and Spider-Man was kinda just like the side character in that feud. And of course, when Norman Osborn did return, he didn't take too kindly to his idea being basically copied, and he took the life of the Goblin King, who was Phil Ulrich, another Hobgoblin, and at one point, another Green Goblin. That's kind of the main problem between these two. Green Goblin just hates that other people are taking his idea and trying to outshine him. Thus, these two have developed a long-lasting rivalry that has exploded into violent battles that have nearly taken out both characters on several different occasions. Now, if you are looking for a rivalry that is entertaining from beginning to end, I highly suggest you read through the 2008 volume of Deadpool, specifically starting at issue number 10. This is happening during Dark Reign, and at this time, Bullseye, who is currently the Dark Avengers Hawkeye, has been contracted to take down Deadpool. Now, these two have actually worked together before, but now that they are set against each other, it's probably the most entertaining rivalry I have ever read, because it's just two completely insane mercenaries fighting each other to the death. In issue 10, Bullseye managed to get an arrow right through Mr. Poole's noggin. Then in issue number 11, Deadpool takes it out, and his brain is still half regenerating as he tries to take on Bullseye in a meat farm, where he suits up in a butchered pig using it as armor, and he skewers Hawkeye with meat hooks. Later on, Bullseye tries to take out the truck that Deadpool is driving with a rocket launcher, and Deadpool literally drifts so that the rocket flies through the window and explodes in the background. There is respect here, but the dynamic between these two psychos is just such a treat to read, and you should definitely check it out. Now, when thinking of Deadpool feuds, a few people come to mind, and one of the big names would be Tony Masters, aka Taskmaster. Taskmaster has a bit more of a rivalry with someone else that we're going to talk about here, and that is Black Widow. While the Black Widow movie showed a version of Taskmaster hunting down Natasha, the Taskmaster miniseries from Jed MacKay and Alessandra Vitti sees Black Widow hunting down Taskmaster for a crime that he didn't commit, the takedown of Maria Hill. We get to learn that Black Widow is the one hero that Taskmaster actually fears, but we also get to see what it's like from his perspective when he's being hunted down by one of the most capable assassins in the Marvel world. And that's saying a lot, because earlier in the series, this guy took on Hyperion. With all the tricks up his sleeves, the conflict between these two as he tried to clear his name is actually super entertaining, and we even see a softer side to the mercenary when he spares her life. One little rivalry actually started in the most minor of ways, and given the opposing sides here are literally fire and ice, it just works really well. During 2018's Fantastic Four number 24, we get a little story told in a flashback to a day that Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, went on a little bit of a temper tantrum after the thing sprayed him with water, and he left the Fantastic Four straight up to go solo. It turns out that at the same time, Bobby Drake Iceman had done a very similar thing with the X-Men, now as a bit of a free agent, and with the Fantastic Four, now 3, having to deal with a public weapons demonstration by Advanced Idea Mechanics, Iceman arrives to literally put out the fires and is inducted onto the team. Iceman then went on a few adventures with the First Family before Johnny heard the news, got real jealous, and came back with a temper. This led to a literal fight between the two before they put their differences aside to save the day and return to their respective teams. And for this last one, I want to talk about a rivalry that reared its head in the MCU. During Infinity War, Thanos had basically wiped out a ton of the Asgardians and left Thor drifting through space, which is when he splats on the windshield of the Guardians of the Galaxy. As soon as the Guardians get Thor inside, Star-Lord is feeling his masculinity being threatened. As Drax states, Star-Lord is a dude. Thor is a man. And I mean, while we may consider Peter to be handsome and at least a little bit muscular, by contrast to Thor, it's harder to say. Peter's team don't help at all, especially when Gamora begins touching Thor's muscles. But then, Thor wakes up, and with his tall stature, tales of godly daddy issues, and deep voice, when he tries to commandeer their pod, Star-Lord tries to square up and deepens his own voice. It's hilarious, and the rivalry continues on into the end of Endgame and the start of Thor Love and Thunder, but we don't need to get into that.
Starting things off with a DC rivalry you likely would never think of. I have Superman and Wonder Woman. Why don't most people think of this one to start? How about because these two are both inherently heroes who also have an extremely close bond as founding members of the Justice League and as 2/3 of DC's Holy Trinity. They often get along so well that many have shipped these two together before in the past, and they've even actually kinda dated in the main continuity, or at least a version of Superman dated Wonder Woman. However, they don't always get along, and there have always been other realities such as Wonder Woman Dead Earth where their friendship has actually shattered into a million pieces because their rivalry and feud was simply that strong. In fact, in that reality, Wonder Woman and Superman's epic fight was so full of passion and hate and so powerful that it ended up destroying all of Earth as a result. What are two heroes that you wouldn't expect to fight each other but where you could see a reality where that happens? Let me know down in the comments. This next rivalry is just not one you'd be thinking of likely at all because they hail from two very different publishers and therefore realities. We're talking about the feud between Batman and Spawn, which of course hails from their own crossover comic. Of course, in the end, these two do choose to team up, but like all good crossovers and team up stories and comics, initially there is a misunderstanding and also some clashing of personalities, I'd say, which causes these two to at first be locked in a fight with one another. Fortunately, they're able to rise above their differences and both recognize each other ultimately as both being heroes in the end. Superman and the Flash have had this bizarre long-standing rivalry in regards to who is faster between them. Kind of a weird thing since, you know, the Flash's whole thing is being fast, but Superman is also pretty fast, so I digress. Likely, this really, I don't think, has much to do with their own concerns surrounding the truth of like who would actually win in a foot race, and instead is more about the fans wanting to know in terms of power scaling, something that many fans are major fans of, deciding who can run faster, punch harder, heal more potently, etc, etc. If you are one of those folks who is wondering, all I'll say is while Superman may have seemingly had some near victories against the Flash in the past, those races were for charity. Some people might think of these two as having a rivalry, but if they did, it would probably be for the wrong reasons. While Zatanna and Catwoman have both been love interests of Batman in the past, that is not where their rivalry actually stems from. Instead, these two actually have issues because of something very specific that happened between them. Really, something that Zatanna did to Catwoman. Zatanna basically flipped Selina's alignment, and when Catwoman finds out, she is understandably upset, as not only can she no longer trust Zatanna, but she is also now questioning who she really is, as she feels her choice to be a hero was possibly not even her own. Man, that would really mess you up. That would really mess you up. Despite both being members of the same team, these two have had beef in the past as well. A lot of this comes from their clash of personalities, I would say. Green Arrow tends to be more brash than Batman and is also actively vocal when he doesn't agree with Batman's plans, something Batman takes issue with usually, especially considering, you know, how much time and effort and how careful he typically is when it comes to crafting said plans. I think in some ways their feud comes from the fact that they are both so similar. Both of them more rely on skill sets rather than superpowers to operate as heroes, and both are millionaire orphans whose hero journeys have both been very personal ones, I would say. There's also that one time that they literally had a love triangle with Black Canary as well, but that was back in a previous continuity at this point. Also, while Batman, you know, has been an orphan since he was a kid, I know that Ollie hasn't, but Ollie does end up kind of becoming one later in his life, so yeah. This one might surprise some folks out there, as these two have a history of being romantic partners, so you wouldn't normally think of them as also being rivals, and yet here we are, talking about Batman and Zatanna. How did these two go from being old friends with, I would say, a romantic spark, and in some realities more or less of a romantic spark, to rivals? Well, it all went down after Batman learned, similarly to Catwoman, that Zatanna had manipulated his mind. Zatanna, girl, you need to stop messing with people's heads, it's just not gaining you any allies. In fact, instead, Batman was so upset that he pretty much cut Z off for a good while, no longer even referring to her by his nickname for her, Z, but instead simply calling her by her full name, Zatanna. Ouch. You know you're in trouble when someone calls you by like your full name. You're like, ooh, I did something wrong. However, time heals all wounds, and fortunately, as time has gone on, after Zatanna obviously apologized, Batman has moved towards forgiving her and trusting her again, even eventually resuming the use of her nickname. This next one isn't one that comes to mind as quickly, but once you think of it, you cannot get it out of your head. It sticks in your head like, oh, I don't know, an explosive might. Zod and Waller have had a rivalry that runs hot, because Waller is a collector of villains, let's be honest, thanks to her involvement in Task Force X, aka the Suicide Squad. She ends up attempting to forcefully recruit Zod to her cause, putting an explosive into his head, like she does with pretty much everybody else, to make him heal for, fear of being eliminated. That's what she do. He might be a Kryptonian, but this is also why she put a special explosive in his head, a kryptonite based one. However, Zod does not take kindly to this treatment and is such an unhinged and determined villain that rather than accept his lot, he simply uses his heat vision to remove said device from his brain, allowing him the freedom to fight back and escape Waller's clutches. Zod will of course always remember that Waller attempted to leash him, and Waller will always think of him as the one that got away and escaped her clutches. Neither of these characters is used to anyone telling them what to do, which is also why they're so well suited to being rivals when their paths do end up crossing. Some may forget that this next rivalry exists, but I would say it most definitely does. It has come in and out of prominence over the years, but oddly, Lady Shiva is known to be one of the most skilled martial artists and assassins in the world, and has a direct rivalry with Black Canary as a result of that, because Black Canary is also equally skilled. In fact, I think Black Canary is ranked among one of the best fighters in all of the DC universe, and I would say in many scenarios she's also shown herself to be even more capable than Lady Shiva. Oftentimes, while they have worked together more than they have fought against one another, the rivalry actually I would say stems from who between them is just the better fighter. Dinah of course also has her literal superpowers with her canary cry, which does give her an edge in terms of who would win against who, though she doesn't typically use it when fighting to determine skill. She wouldn't use her canary cry because it's about who can fight better. Black Canary is often pulled into fights with Lady Shiva so that Shiva can kind of prove herself to be superior to her, although often Canary is the one who actually comes out on top between them. Although there have been times when Lady Shiva has also even offered to train Canary, although Canary has said no thanks. That being said, there is a certain amount of respect that these women obviously have for each other as well, which has also contributed to them teaming up at times throughout their history, despite, like I said, being kind of rivals. While many expect this next one, I would say on some kind of level, I don't think anyone would have anticipated that Damian Wayne, out of all the Robins, would attempt to target Harley and make a specific nemesis out of her. Feels odd, right? But that is exactly what happened, or what Damian attempted to have happen in the Harley Quinn animated series. Here, Damian Wayne is the current Robin for Batman when in season 1 of the animated series, he crosses paths with Harley Quinn. Honestly, I love this depiction of Damian too. He's such a brat and I love it. Harley is at the time attempting to make Batman her own nemesis, and as such refuses to fight Robin, who she sees as being, a kid. He's just too young for her to fight. After this interaction though, Damian actually tells a different version of this story when they met, while on the Tawny Young show, where he claims that he actually beat Harley and that she actually begged to be his nemesis. Ultimately, it's later revealed in the episode that Damian is kind of searching for a nemesis as a result of his own insecurities, and I would say to prove himself capable to his father, Batman, who later confesses to Damian that he didn't actually have his own nemesis until he was in his 20s. So maybe Damian shouldn't be so harsh on himself. Darkseid and Anti-Monitor are not people I would think of when I think of rivals for either of these major villainous characters. There's a lot of other people I would put first, in my mind. Heroes, for example. But that is what these two ultimately are to each other as well. I know, kind of surprising. Well, surprising if you didn't read a certain event. Where did this feud come from, and why does this rivalry exist? Well, it turns out that it has to do with each of these villains' plans for the universe. Anti-Monitor is hell-bent on destroying everything, and Darkseid just simply wants to rebuild the universe to, fit his own image. No big deal. As a result, these two fought for what the fate of the universe should be. That's right, they fought each other for who would actually get to decide how to mess up the universe, each in their own way. This all came to a head in Darkseid War, where it's also alluded to that this rivalry has actually existed for a very long time. The clash of these two ultimately resulted in both of them being defeated, but in different ways. Guy Gardner is probably the greatest Green Lantern to rub multiple people the wrong way, but especially Batman. Though, to be fair to Guy, he didn't just annoy Batman, Batman also annoyed him. And it's true that many Green Lanterns do seem to rub the Dark Knight the wrong way. We're gonna talk about that more later on in this list, but for now let's focus on Guy. When it comes to Batman's feud with Guy, it's often summed up in one intense moment that happened between them. During their time together on the Justice League, at one point Guy feels that he would be a better leader than Batman and just decides to challenge him for the right to lead the team via a fist fight. To make the fight fair and prove his own fighting prowess, Guy decides to ditch his ring. All in all, a massive mistake, as without it, Batman is able to take him out in one single punch. For some reason, Superman has this crazy obsession with beating the Flash at his own thing, being fast. Well, you might think I'm exaggerating here, as you know, there have been a few times where Superman simply wanted to catch Flash because he was being mind controlled, or he was going to run to his death, or needed some sense talked into him to help him basically. I can also guarantee that there are many panels and instances that hint at Superman's competitive nature and his desire to prove himself as simply faster than the Flash. He has also had countless foot races with countless Flashes, and almost every time has either tied or lost, with more losses than ties I believe at this point. Yet even though they have been racing since the 1960s, in 2011 Superman is chasing Barry Allen's Flash in Superman issue 709 and is still seen wondering to himself in a panel, which of them is faster? Is it me? Is it the Flash? Who's really faster here? Give it up, Superman. Guess what? It's not you. Quit trying to take this one thing away from the Flash. You have a million other things you're great at. I think we could just let the Flash have this one, no? When I think of Wonder Woman versus Superman, the first thought that comes to my mind is always Wonder Woman Dead Earth. It's just such a stunning, beautiful, and yet horrific and gritty comic. Usually Diana and Clark are good friends in the comics. This is also how they start out in Dead Earth, but due to a devastating loss, a schism happens between them, ultimately resulting in them becoming rivals and just straight up enemies. We see these two fight in a flashback where Diana decides to take out her fury and her frustration on Clark, blaming Superman for what Man's World has done to her home and her family, especially her mom. There was a nuclear strike on Themyscira in this Elseworld, but while that likely had some global effects at least, what really destroys the world is actually Superman and Wonder Woman fighting each other. They fly around the world, and the collateral damage from their fight wreaks havoc on their surroundings throughout it. In the end, it is shown that Wonder Woman won this fight by punching Superman through his chest. However, she ends up suffering from amnesia, and she actually doesn't recall their fight until issue number 3 of the series, realizing that she's kind of to blame for everything that's happening in this Dead Earth. Martian Manhunter was there when John Stewart's Green Lantern let an entire planet be destroyed as a result of his ego. The two were deployed to the planet in the hopes of saving it, but Green Lantern didn't feel that he needed Martian Manhunter's help and instead decided to send John away. Unfortunately, this was soon after proven to be a mistake, as when John Stewart found the explosive on this planet and the room it was contained in and found that they were painted entirely yellow, preventing John from using his Green Lantern powers to do anything to destroy or defuse it, he was kind of put in a pickle there. Yikes. As a result, the planet was destroyed, with only John surviving the explosion, leaving Martian Manhunter grossly disappointed in his colleague Green Lantern and in Green Lantern's hubris here. Though granted, Martian Manhunter wasn't so mad that he felt Green Lantern should simply just end it all. In fact, John is the one who questions Stewart and prevents him from taking his own life after his tragic failing. When it comes to the Bat family, there are quite a few feuds to be had, unsurprisingly. I mean, it's a big family tree, and you know how families are, they like to fight sometimes. Still, I think one of the most dramatic was the one between Tim Drake and Damian Wayne. Initially, when these two met, they seemingly got off on the wrong foot, and Tim wanted to try and just offer an olive branch. This came in the form of offering to spar with young Damian, with Tim promising to take it easy on him. However, everything quickly went awry when Damian revealed that earlier in the night he'd actually killed a criminal, the Spook, taking his head. The two ended up fighting for real, and Damian knocks out Robin's Tim Drake, leaving him bleeding on the floor of the Batcave and donning a version of his costume when he goes to confront his father, letting Batman know that he's ready to replace Tim as Robin. Batman ends up of course returning and retrieving Tim, helping to fix up the damage that Damian did. Eventually these two would move past this feud, but for a while there, it was basically life-threatening. Oh boy, does Catwoman have a reason to have beef with Zatanna. These two ended up in a fight with one another after it was revealed that Catwoman may have only become a full-fledged hero as a result of Zatanna manipulating her mind. Because of this revelation, Catwoman turned on Zatanna, with the two getting into a physical fight. In the end, Selina was rightly pissed at Z after learning this, feeling like she had never in her life been more violated than she was when Zatanna changed her against her will. It also made Catwoman question whether or not she was actually the hero she had become at this point. Because I mean, if that wasn't her choice, was that really her doing that? Since she just had no choice in the matter, because Zatanna changed her mind. One of the most iconic feuds in DC Comics isn't necessarily a real narrative feud. I mean, these two don't typically go after one another to just fight each other needlessly. They don't really have much of a reason to be jealous of the other or even dislike them, but they do end up pitted against each other often in alternate realities, and just because people like to see who would win if they got into a fight, because they're similar. In most cases, because they're so evenly matched, it generally ends in a standstill or with Superman implied as the victor. While Superman might be weak to Shazam's magic, Shazam is often forced to transform back into Billy by Superman's tactics. Who do you think is more powerful? Do you think it's Shazam or do you think it's Superman? I don't know, but we like to see them fight. We like to see what would happen, who's really stronger. I think I would still go for Superman, but I do think Shazam being magical is like a huge asset in a fight against Superman. This is a long-standing rivalry that kind of makes sense when you consider Batman had to put up with the antics of Guy Gardner, trying to steal command of the Justice League from him, and of course Hal Jordan mooning him, which is totally a thing that happened. But Batman's rivalry with the Green Lantern superseded even just these two sometimes jerks. Batman has even had beef with John Stewart, one of my favorite Green Lanterns. John Stewart comes at him for all the Green Lantern hate that he spews, calling him out as a man who is just threatened by Hal Jordan because Hal isn't afraid of him. Rather than admit that not seeing eye to eye with Hal is maybe a bit of a two-way street, Batman just decides to double down here. He really doesn't like Green Lanterns, telling John exactly how it is. I mean, I get it in terms of Hal and Guy's cases, but John? Really? You're gonna let a feud form there too, just because of the other Green Lanterns? Yipes. I mean, I get it. I just feel like Batman doesn't trust Green Lanterns, but it's John Stewart. I feel like you could trust John Stewart. He doesn't even wear a mask, you know? He doesn't even want to hide his face. John Stewart, proud man. These two are heroes who both adopted mantles from other heroes. Wally West became the Flash after Barry Allen, and Kyle Rayner replaced Hal Jordan's Green Lantern. The pair consistently mock one another and often try to debase each other, criticizing one another left, right, and center. This feud started as soon as the two pretty much met, and it actually stems from the fact that they simply think the other is just not good enough to replace the former hero who wore the costume previous to them. Which is interesting because almost everyone else around them thinks that they both do a good job. Rather than just accept that they are both doing their best and both are good in different ways, they choose to bicker and compete at almost every opportunity they get, at least initially. Maybe this comes from some own insecurity within themselves to begin with, of not feeling confident in their own ability to carry on the mantle of the hero who came before them. So they see someone else who's doing it and they just kind of take out that insecurity they have within themselves on the other person. I think they might be projecting. These two are often thought of as being the best of friends, and well, they are, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a rivalry. In fact, in some realities, the differences between them lead the two to becoming sworn enemies, as opposed to staying the best of friends. The best thing about these two heroes, in fact, is how different they both are to one another, and perhaps what has made their rivalry and their friendship so strong throughout the years and throughout DC's multiverse and the history of the multiverse is that they both see how much they differ. In some cases, they deeply respect and admire each other's differences. In other cases, it actually leads them to try and break their once fellow colleague, unable to reconcile and accept the other's differences. And we've seen this multiple times. I'm not just talking about Batman v Superman, I'm not just talking about Injustice. It happens. It happens.
Today we're talking about some of the biggest Marvel rivalries in history. These are characters who just downright hate each other. Nothing like a good old college rivalry to keep you sharp on your toes. If Victor Von Doom and Reed Richards, two of the smartest men in Marvel Comics, had teamed up together, the world would probably be a complete utopia. Unfortunately, Dr. Doom is a completely arrogant guy, and he is much more theoretical, whereas Reed is incredibly practical. Reed also seems to not respect boundaries, as in college he read his rival's research on trying to save his own mother and then proceeded to tell Doom all the ways it wouldn't work. Doom's arrogance led him to dismiss Reed, and then it turned out Reed was right, which led directly to the scarring of Doom's face. Their rivalry comes almost entirely down to the fact that Doom will never admit that Reed is smarter than him. What's interesting about this next one is that there probably wouldn't even be a Captain America without the Red Skull's existence. If it weren't for Johann Smith's activities in the Axis side of power during Marvel's World War II, then the plan for a super soldier to combat him may not have ever appeared. Stopping the Red Skull was one of Steve Rogers' first assignments, and his whole Captain America persona was created in stark contrast to the Red Skull, who had become an icon for his side of the war. As such, the rivalry between these two characters is one of the longest running ones in Marvel's history. Even after Captain America was frozen in ice for decades, came back to the world, Skull found a way to follow him. The mutant Rogue first started out as a villain in Marvel Comics. She was part of Mystique's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and one of their first attacks on the Avengers involved ambushing a recently returned Danvers. Rogue, who was still learning to use her abilities, accidentally fully absorbed both Danvers' memories and her powers. The attack completely drained Carol of her powers and erased her mind, and then to add insult to injury, Rogue immediately chucked Carol off the Golden Gate Bridge. Luckily, Spider-Woman was there and able to rescue her, and Professor Xavier was able to restore her memories, but it wasn't complete. Carol remembered things, but it was more like watching a show about her life instead of actually having lived it. Carol regained her powers eventually, but her life was destroyed by a scared young woman who then had to deal with the consequences of her actions and the harm it caused both of them. Now, when it comes to Venom, it's very easy to say that his main rival he hates most is Peter Parker, Spider-Man, but Venom more so longs for Peter. That's like his perfect ideal host. But when Venom's offspring Carnage bonded with a complete psychopath in Cletus Cassidy and the desire to end the lives and cause destruction, Venom found a new rival. At that point in time, for Venom and Eddie Brock, Eddie and the other hosts of Venom over time have instilled this sort of odd desire to do good in the symbiote. Venom can be bad, but he is good enough to know that Carnage is really bad, and Venom would even put aside his hatred for Spider-Man to fight Carnage alongside the web slinger the first time they ever came to blows. That's a pretty serious thing for Venom. Carnage has been Venom's #1 enemy ever since. The villain Bullseye is just not a nice guy, and the evidence for that statement can be found in his history with his rival Daredevil. Not only was he an original Daredevil villain, first appearing in Daredevil 131, but their rivalry became more and more personal, especially when we learned that Bullseye had become completely obsessed with his defeats to Daredevil, even hurting others like Black Widow just to get Matt Murdock. But Bullseye just completely lost it when the Man Without Fear defeated him yet again. Now he literally started to see strangers on the street as Daredevil and would promptly send them to the afterlife for that reason. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say the rivalry became personal for Daredevil too, especially after two separate occasions where Bullseye had ended the lives of Matt Murdock's biggest love interest in Elektra and Karen Page. Kingpin started out as a Spider-Man villain. It was never personal, except maybe when Spider-Man embarrassed Wilson Fisk in front of an entire prison for hurting Peter's Aunt May. He's not Spider-Man's main rival. Another closer contender for that role would be Dr. Octopus. But look, if we are being honest with each other here, the personal connections and personal attacks against Spider-Man that belong to Norman Osborn, Green Goblin, have absolutely made a bigger splash in Peter's life than anything any other villain has done. Green Goblin orchestrated the Clone Saga, one of the most infamous Spider-Man stories that saw the hero completely doubt who he was, and he did it all from the shadows. After taking the life of Gwen Stacy and coming back from his own demise, Norman makes Peter's life as miserable as he can because he absolutely hates that guy, and Peter, despite being a hero, can only trust Norman Osborn as far as he can throw him. Funnily enough though, Spider-Man isn't the only person hated by Green Goblin. For a short while, Norman Osborn's character was thought to be deceased, but the pressure was on to have a character like the Green Goblin who was so fun and insane and wild. Roger Stern decided that instead of just bringing Norman back, he'd create a new villain. Shady business mogul Roderick Kingsley stumbled onto one of Norman Osborn's old hideouts filled with Green Goblin equipment. He then took some time and actually improved said equipment and became the Hobgoblin. Despite some obvious differences, when Norman did return, he didn't take too kindly to his idea of being basically copied. Green Goblin and Hobgoblin have developed a long-lasting rivalry that has exploded into violent battles that have nearly taken out both characters on several occasions, and the rivalry even spilled into when other characters took up the respective titles. When it comes to Deadpool, it seems that he doesn't seem to have his own dedicated villain, but I can assure you he does. The one who may just be his number one goes to the name T-Ray. T-Ray was introduced in 1997's Deadpool #1 as another merc who competed with Deadpool to be the best mercenary in Hell House, a mercenary dispatch center that Deadpool frequented. To that end, he basically became like Deadpool's Sabretooth. T-Ray set Deadpool's mask on fire, setting Wade into a panic. Typhoid Mary later impersonated Siren and slept with Wade as part of T-Ray's plan to mess with Deadpool. After psychologically breaking Deadpool, T-Ray nearly wiped him out physically and took over the Hell House. T-Ray also resurrected Wade's wife, Mercedes Wilson, before attacking him again. Deadpool was led to believe that T-Ray had taken out Mercedes years later, making their rivalry all the more personal. During the battle, however, it was revealed that T-Ray was actually the original Wade Wilson. T-Ray claimed that Deadpool was a mercenary who murked his wife, Mercedes, and stole his name. As a result, T-Ray trained to become a mercenary and get his revenge on Deadpool. Over the years, it became unclear who the original Wade Wilson really was between Deadpool and T-Ray, but no matter who it was, these two have a dark past that constantly brings them back into conflict. There is another Deadpool rival who I want to talk about. His name is Thanos. However, this rivalry is all over a girl or a cosmic entity, really. See, for the longest time, Thanos had been simping hard for Mistress Death, the literal embodiment of it in the Marvel Universe. But because of Deadpool's many run-ins with Death itself and how he basically keeps escaping her, this lady has been a little bit interested in the merc for a hot minute now, and Wade fell hard for her as well. The big purple problem is Thanos. Thanos had essentially cursed Deadpool with immortality, literally vowing to find a way to resurrect Deadpool anytime he manages to actually pass away and get some sleep, for the sole purpose of keeping Wade and the Mistress away from each other. It's clear that the hate is there on Thanos' side of things, even if it's just born from jealousy. Other than that, Thanos just also enjoys doing horrible things to Deadpool because he can. He's an absolute psychopath after all. For our last point today, we're talking about the King of Atlantis, Namor, the Submariner, and the King of Wakanda, the Black Panther. Now, both being kings of powerful nations, they lay outside the normal bounds of geopolitics. You'd think they'd be strong allies, but they hate each other. Black Panther is a cold, calculating, stoic guy who thinks logically and isn't really that friendly. Namor is a loud, brash, emotional, and arrogant king who likes to brag a lot and is more extroverted, but is still also not very friendly either. They had respect for each other in the past, but then Namor basically destroyed more than half of Wakanda with a massive tidal wave when he had the powers of the Phoenix. Black Panther would then join the Illuminati, and during the incursions, the Wakanda armies attacked Atlantis. Then, and though they worked out things a bit, T'Challa brutally beat the absolute snot out of Namor, who just destroyed an alternate Earth, and he and Black Bolt of the Inhumans would basically doom Namor to another world that was being destroyed by an incursion.